Hi, I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Mary Rose.
And welcome back to our podcast, Reading Through Scripture. We have come across the Red Sea, and last time we heard about the bitter water being made sweet, and today we're picking it up in chapter 16, verse 1.
The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt, in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God."
So I realize I don't have it in my notes, but you might be wondering, what is the wilderness of sin? Because that's just a name. It can also be translated Shin. I can't remember what the meaning exactly is now, but it's not the same as the English word sin. We just have transliterated it phonetically from Hebrew into English. So we haven't given it like a new, changed it to mean the same thing as what it meant in Hebrew. But I thought I had it written down in front of me, but I don't have it. But sometimes you're like, what do you mean they brought him into the wilderness of sin? But it kind of works in English, metaphorically, because this is a wilderness filled with a lot of grumbling, complaining, sinning, brokenness.
Well, and I know that Hebrew is not the same as current languages, but sin means without in Spanish, Italian, I don't know about French.
Okay.
But sin is without. So that kind of makes sense in this story if there is some relation there.
Yeah.
I don't know if there is. But
yeah, I can't, like I said, I just can't remember. I thought I had it written down, and I just looked at my notes on my computer, and I don't have it there either, which is interesting because that's not what sin means biblically in English. The way I was talking about it in confirmation is sin, when we speak about it from the biblical perspective, and not this word, but the word that we translate sin, is to miss the mark. It's an archery term. So you're aiming at the bullseye, but you're missing it. So it's a little different than without, but similar.
But I'm just saying with the grumbling about not having anything to eat.
Yeah.
It
absolutely.
fits if that is what it means.
It does, yeah. I'll try and look it up and see if I can find it. Again, I thought I had it written down, but I don't have it with me. And this is on the 15th day of the second month. So they've been, since they came out, so they've had a little bit of time now in the wilderness of having things provided. And we hear their grumbling, right? They're complaining and longing for what had been given to them in Egypt, what they'd had. The old meat, the old pots that were full. It just shows how quick we are to minimize how bad the bad times were and to forget the blessings that we've been provided. Because immediately their idea is, well, I'd much rather be in slavery.
Right.
Where I was crying out to God day and night. But at least I had a full stomach.
Sure.
Something's not right there. So then what happens in verse 4 then is that God decides he's going to test them. He's going to do something to test whether or not they'll trust in him is really the point, right? Is to see if they will walk in the Lord's instructions, in his ways. And instructions here in Hebrew is the word Torah. So if they will walk in his Torah. So we translate it to say, will they follow what I'm asking you to do? But it's a good reminder for us, because we sometimes think of like the Torah as like the law. That's another way it's often translated, like instructions sound like that. But Torah is much more than that. It's the whole way of life. It's the whole teaching, instruction of the Lord. And so there's kind of a pattern that is now being established that continues throughout all of their wilderness sojourning. Are the people going to trust in the Lord and in Moses? When that wanes, there's a need for stricter lessons and greater rebuke. So we'll see, as things continue to progress, the testing and the consequences become, the people show that they're unfaithful, they don't trust, even in the small things. And I don't know exactly what to make of this, but in verse 4, where it says, I'm about to rain down bread from heaven. That's just like an interesting thought and unique, obviously, image. But this is the first time that rain has been used in like a benevolent sense of bringing blessings upon the earth since Genesis 2 verse 5, where God said he was going to cause it to rain on the earth and bring forth vegetation and sprout plants yielding fruit and seed so that people could eat.
I mean, but we talk about famine in Genesis.
Right.
Like not having rain.
Sure.
Like in that case, rain would be a blessing.
Sure, but it doesn't say that rain has been sent as a blessing in response to the famines in any of those.
Oh.
So it's the first time, and we did have the rain of the flood, which is a rain of judgment, obviously.
Right.
So it's the first time that there's a rain that's a blessing, causing people to come down, or causing the rain to come down, or the bread to come down for the people. And so he's going to test and see if they'll trust that he's going to provide for them day after day. Or did you want to talk more about verse 4 at all? Anything that you had?
I mean, I'm in my sourdough era right now, so I know how much work bread is. So it'd be kind of cool if it came down from heaven.
That is true, but it might be as flavorful as your sourdough bread, because we're going to hear a description of how it tastes in a little bit, and we'll talk more about that then. But we get some other instructions, right? It's not just that they're supposed to go out and get it, but the instructions that come in verse 5, that on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. And I think there's some various questions about this that is kind of vague. So, is it that they're gathering the same amount and they find they have double? Or is it that they're just gathered double to bring in?
I don't understand what you just said. That made no sense to me. I only understand it
as them gathering double?
Yeah, I don't understand how you can understand it a different way.
So it says when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So they could find that when they're gathering it in, somehow they've got double, like a miraculous multiplying of it.
Oh, that's not what mine says.
What does yours say?
That's probably why I can't read it that way.
Okay.
Mine says, on the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on other days.
So that's supplying some clarity. That's interpreting, which is probably the right way to read it. But if you let it be vague, it could be that
doubles miraculously
every week.
Like sourdough.
Yeah. They have a
doubles
starter,
miraculously.
and it miraculously doubles. Yep.
And it would do really well there because it's warm and dry.
That's right. There you go. So maybe the manna was a little like sourdough.
Maybe it was sourdough.
Maybe. That is heavenly bread, right? Mm. And if that's true, then it's really that God will determine how far the bread they get goes. And because we see later when they go to gather it, on the other days, the first time they gather it, we'll find this later in the chapter, whether they gathered much or they gathered little, they found they had exactly the right amount. And so it leads me to almost think that maybe this is God, a miraculous intervention that's being brought about here. I wouldn't press that too far, but it wouldn't be out of God's character to make things meet the needs that people have. And we have the story in, I can't remember if it's the end of First Kings or the beginning of Second Kings. I can't remember if it's Elijah or Elisha, but I think it's Elisha in Second Kings, where there's the widow who has no oil or anything else, and it just keeps on.
Die.
Pardon?
And she's gonna die.
Yeah, her and her son are gonna die,
Yeah.
and then it just keeps going until it meets the full need, and they find that when does it run out and stop? Well, when the famine ends, when they don't need it anymore. When does the manna stop? When the 40 years are over and the need has ended. So maybe there's something to that. Maybe not. And so part of this is they're doing this so that as they go out, every day they have this reminder of the Lord who provides their daily bread, who is the one who brought them out and is continuing to watch over them. And there's some question I have about verse 7, but I don't really know what to do with it. Where it says, "In the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you are grumbling against us?" So is this really about... It seems like this verse isn't speaking here, at least, about a visual representation of the glory of God.
Even though there is one 3 verses later?
Right. That's why, at least, you can read it that way. But I think here, this is kind of saying that you'll see is a substitute for his love and mercy and providential care. You'll see the glory in God caring for you by providing this manna on the ground every morning. That's the sign of his glory, I think, here. But I might be mistaken. And I think if you read it that way, that it's about his love and his providential care, that's part of his glory, that fits well with Exodus 34, where God shows Moses his glory, and the glory that Moses sees there is when God gives that self-description of Yahweh, Yahweh, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. It's about his mercy, not the visible representation. So it's about God's character of love and provision is really the heart of his glory.
So I guess it's just confusing to me then why it uses the same word of there being the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud just a few verses later.
And I mean, that's the presence of God that's visibly with them regularly, and that is another sign of that. And I mean, I guess that's another sign of assurance of his care and his character. And maybe this is meant to be the cloud, but it doesn't... That seems a little redundant with the verse just after. And with it being in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, that I would tie that to the manna, not to the cloud. Because a cloud has been there by day and by night. Or pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night.
I don't understand your point in saying that.
That this part about speaking of them seeing the Lord's glory is more about experiencing his care, love, and compassion than it is like a visible thing. It's more about like them seeing the character of God than it is just like how awesome he is. So this is testing them. He's testing them so that they would know and see and trust in his character and his love.
So would it be appropriate to read this and go, okay, so the glory of the Lord here is like demonstrating his character as one who loves and serves his people, and then point that forward to Jesus and talk about him being the glory of God?
You didn't read my notes, did you?
Oh, that's in your notes?
The next line is, later, they will not only see his love, but hold it in their hands. 1 John 1, verse 1 and 2. They said, we have seen, we have touched, we have felt. So yeah, I think that's entirely valid and appropriate, right? Because we see in Exodus 34, which I think is one of the key passages, when Moses sees God's glory, and it says he's slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and all the stuff that comes after that. Because how do we see that truly manifested and see how that actually can work out, that God can be both just and merciful? It's only in Christ. Mm-hmm. And only in him do we see the law perfectly upheld and God's grace and mercy overflow to the people. And so I think that's 100% a valid move. And I think that then reminds us too that not only there, but if you go to that first John 1 and 2 passage, that we've held it in their hands. We can say we still do that when we go to the Lord's Supper. We hold tangibly a token of his mercy and his love. We receive it, of his compassion that we take into ourselves. His glory is put into our hands week in and week out at the Lord's table. And I think that's one of the key things that sometimes we overlook, is that God, while he doesn't need to come in physical ways, like in and of himself, he doesn't have to do that. Mm-hmm. He knows that that's comforting to us. And so our God is a God who comes to us in means, in physical things through creation.
So you could think of the manna as like a precursor to communion.
Oh, for sure. And, I mean, doesn't Jesus do that in John 6? Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness but died. I'm the true bread of heaven. That this was always pointing to. For the life that sustains you in the wilderness journey that is this life in this world. For eternal life. That gives you the true life-giving bread.
Is it like a cultural thing that bread equals presence?
Tell me more. I'm not sure if I'm tracking exactly with what you're asking or meaning.
Like, I don't think, like, bread in and of itself is, like, symbolizes, like, being present with someone.
No.
But, like...
You mean, like, breaking bread is, like, an idea together?
Not breaking bread. Just bread. But, like, it's very much has to do with, like, God being present with his people in both those instances. Like, so I'm just asking, like, is that a cultural thing for the Jewish people?
I don't think... it is for them, but I think it's more than that. Because I think, from what I understand, ancient Middle Eastern culture, and even still today, there's something deeper and symbolic about having a meal together. It means you're actually in fellowship and communion and friendship, which is why we, as Lutherans, would practice close communion, where we say, unless you're actually in fellowship with us, you probably shouldn't be taking this with us. Because it's symbolic of saying you agree with the wholeness of our community. Not that if you don't take it, we're not saying you're not Christian, but we're saying you don't actually belong to this community of believers. And I think the reason that bread is so important in Jewish culture and then again in Christian culture is that bread, or a bread equivalent like rice, is symbolic of, like, is the staple of almost every culture's diet. And so it's that God, I think, longs to be in the simple everyday things. His presence is mediated to us, comes to us through these things that are very common. Water, bread, wine, word. These aren't things that are, like, only a select few get. They're for everyone. He doesn't come to us in, I don't know, Dom Perignon. What?
Diamonds
and Dom Perignon, yeah. He comes to us in, or caviar and, whatever it might be. Could he? Sure. But I think he longs for the things that everyone has access to. And so part of this is God lowers himself and finds these things that even the poorest of the poor typically get.
I still think it's weird that it's going to talk about the glory of the Lord, but it's apparently not talking about the glory of the Lord mentioned 3 verses later.
So, I feel like that's a natural transition, because the next note I have is on verse 10, where it says, as it speaks of seeing the glory of God, some have suggested that what people saw in the cloud was the glorious appearance of Christ. Mm-hmm. And Paul likely had this in mind when he wrote of Christ accompanying the Israelites in the wilderness when they were under the cloud, that Christ was the one visibly present with them there. And that this passage also foreshadows the cloud on Sinai and ultimately coming to dwell in the tabernacle in chapter 40, which will lead them and assure them of God's presence with them in the wilderness. So there is maybe there's not as much of a distinction as I'm making, but I just think that language of in the morning you shall see it makes it distinct from the cloud where they're seeing God's presence and glory in a different way. That, as far as I know, is still with them. Like, the cloud hasn't left, to my understanding.
I mean, I feel like when you read it all together, in verse 8, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling. And then, like, Moses says to Aaron, say to the Israelite community, come before the Lord, he's heard your grumbling. And while Aaron was speaking, they all look and see the glory of the Lord. Like, I don't know.
Sure.
It all seems to be tied to their grumbling.
Sure. Okay. Well, maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe the cloud hasn't appeared yet, and this is the beginning of the cloud appearing. Like, maybe after Egypt, after they were drowned in the sea and it protected them, maybe it went away for a little while. We don't know for sure. We know that the cloud comes and descends on the tabernacle at the end of Exodus to symbolize God's presence in the built tabernacle. But we don't really know exactly here. And there is some connection there. And maybe they go hand in hand, right? The cloud and the provision of things. Because that's in response to their grumbling, God still has mercy on them. That's part of his glory too. Because we're a bunch of grumbling, no good, know-it-alls. And so it's good that we are reminded that God still loves us, still provides for us, calls us to trust in him, but that in the face of our grumbling that we would look to God's glory and see it, and see his glory in provision, in mercy, in compassion, and let that lead us to change our lives and amend our ways. And, I mean, again, kind of tying this together, the point of all of this is ultimately so that they will know that I, Yahweh, am their God. That's verse 12, who is present with them and who will provide for them, right? And it's interesting that just that grumbling comes up over and over again, which is very much characteristic of the Egyptians. Maybe not the grumbling, but like the not listening, not heeding, disbelieving. The whole point of the Exodus, the earlier part, and the plagues, was that that Egypt would know that Yahweh is Lord. And now we have this testing, this provision, so that Israel will recognize it and not doubt and not turn away and not go to grumbling and not turn to false gods.
It's interesting that the thing standing in the way of their faith is that they're hungry.
Yeah. We make we were talking about this in Bible study this morning, but we make a lot of bad decisions when we're hungry, when we're tired, when we're angry, when we're lonely, when we're in those positions. We tend to forget all of the other blessings and the other things that have come our way. We often are driven by whatever we're feeling in the moment, which is not typically a good Lord and Master to follow. Let's pick it up at verse 13. In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine, flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. You shall each take an omer, according to the number of the persons that each of you has in his tent." And the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over till the morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. So, like I was saying, that's kind of that miraculous part, right? When some gather more and some gather less, they find they have exactly what they were supposed to be gathering. And then, of course, they're given instructions, and God's provided this miraculous thing, and what do? Not listen.
Well, they're worried they won't be able to eat tomorrow.
Yeah. God has provided today, but he might not do it tomorrow for us.
Sure. And I mean, also in that time, I mean, other gods were definitely viewed as being very fickle. So, like, if all of these people have spent time with the Egyptian quote-unquote gods that changed at the drop of a hat, so you can understand how they might have been influenced by that culture.
Sure. And that's such an important point to make, because that's not only true then, but I think it's true of the time of the apostles in Jesus' day. We talked about this in Acts, of like believing that the gods, they had human emotions and were heightened. They just reacted like humanity did, but worse, with more power. Mm-hmm. We may not think exactly that way today, but we still have a lot of people who believe they're at the mercy of impersonal forces, that they don't know how we're going to respond. Have I really cleansed my chakra, or gotten the right crystals, or done the right things to get the blessings? Which, if you're just at the mercy of fate or those blessings or doing something right, man, you constantly worry about whether or not there'll be enough for tomorrow. You constantly live with a lack of peace and a lack of security. But what God offers is not the lack of that, but the promise that he's loving and knows our every need and will provide for us. That's a very different posture for us to have and live by. You want to read the next section, starting at verse 22?
On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning." So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out." So the people rested on the 7th day.
So, I meant to talk about this a moment ago, but it's fine because it came up again. So an omer is roughly 1 day's ration. So this is also kind of an icon, an image, a reminder that God will provide this day our daily bread. They wouldn't have had that prayer, and he'll send maggots to remind us if we lose faith and try to provide for ourselves and think that we're the ones in control of all those things. So God is a God of abundance when we trust, and a God of redistribution when we do not. That's not obviously always the case. If we live in trust and faith, we find we always have what we need. And when we don't, we find we tend to lose the things that we put our trust in. He takes away those idols. God's people are not to accumulate stuff for tomorrow, but to share with a boldness and a holy confidence that God will provide for tomorrow, that he's going to meet our needs. As we continue now with what you just read, something that strikes me in this section is that, at least initially, no mandate had been given. And
you mean for Sabbath?
Yeah, for getting double. It just says they went out and they gathered twice as much. And so it says like that. That's wild that they just do that. Maybe it's just not explained, or maybe we're supposed to assume they've already heard that. But the chiefs are surprised that the people have done this in this section. And so there's kind of 2 ways we can look at this. The people by accident did the right thing, or, if going with what I talked about earlier, if they gathered and they found, somehow we have double, even though I feel like I gathered the same. then it's God's miraculous provision for them, already providing on that 6th day what they needed. So they were worried about the rot only to learn it was in fact God's miraculous provision. So if you've seen when you tried to keep it the other days and it rots immediately, there's a valid reason why you'd go, I don't really want to try and eat this tomorrow. It doesn't last. And so this is obviously the manna as a whole is miracle upon miracle upon miracle. So of them gathering on the 6th day, what they think is 1 omer, only to find it's 2 by miracle, wouldn't be really much of a stretch of the imagination.
Sure.
I don't feel like at this point. And I think verse 25 to 30 just shows again how immediately they don't trust or listen. And beyond that they scorn the gift of Sabbath from Yahweh. They don't trust in God's provision and rest in the gift that he's given them.
Well, I wonder why they went out on the 7th when they had the bread from the day before.
And it still hadn't gone bad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, is it greed? Is it,
Were they gluttonous the night before and just ate it all? I don't know. But yeah, it is interesting. And also interesting to note, this is the first time in verse 23 that Sabbath is used as a noun in Scripture. In Genesis 2, verses 2 and 3, where it says God rested, it's as a verb. So he ceased. So, in a sense, part of this testing that God is bringing, that we heard about in verse 4, is also about whether or not we or they will trust that God's blessings are separated from our work. So if we stop, will the blessing still remain? Will God still provide for us? And I think that's the heart of what we need to remember about Sabbath today, because obviously Jesus tells us the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's not, we don't have to. But part of it is learning to trust that if we don't work or if we don't do things, the universe will still be upheld. Things will still continue on. Things aren't going to fall apart. We have freedom to stop and remind ourselves that God's upholding everything. And I hear myself saying this in the irony of our conversation yesterday, Mary Rose, about how I struggle when we have a day without stuff to do. I struggle with the being. Even when it's not like God's work, I'm like, okay, it's Sabbath day, time to get all the other things I need to do around the house I want to do done. I'm not good at resting. I still need to learn to grow in this.
You're grumpy when you're not busy.
Trying. Hey, this Christmas break, I did have one day where I remained in my pajamas the whole day. I don't know the last time I've done that.
Yeah, you don't usually do that.
You and Zoe do your pajama day like that, but I don't do one of those usually.
I think you still left the house that day, though, because you walked the dogs.
Yeah, but I did it in my pajamas.
Right. But you left the house. That's peak level slothing when you don't even leave the house.
Yeah, but our dogs needed a walk. Hopefully they didn't hear that. So, one of... bringing this back to Sabbath, and why this is so important that we learn this, is part of it is that we're reminded that the blessings of God, particularly in the matter of our salvation, are separated from our works. We don't earn it. And so the eternal blessing we're hoping to get, the Sabbath rest, is not because we've earned it, but because God, it's a gift from God. And that applies to a lot of other matters too. We're reminded that God can choose to bless us entirely apart from our work. Psalm 127, verse 1 and 2 hint at that. And he can bless our work so that less effort yields more results, or he can abandon us to feverish work that achieves nothing at all. That's what Habakkuk says.
That's depressing.
So sometimes you work harder and it doesn't gain you anything, and sometimes you work less and God will bless it abundantly. Which fits very well with what I say, but not always how I live, to be honest. Because I repeatedly echo the phrase that we control faithfulness and God controls fruitfulness. But then sometimes I don't always act like that. I end up doing more. But
Yeah, but that's in an effort to be faithful.
sure.
It's not necessarily counter to that.
Yeah. It's a good reminder as we come to a new place that, like, when I see all these different opportunities going, I can't do everything. So what's the faithful thing? And resting that God is still going to uphold the other things and provide for them, even if can't do that capacity or haven't raised up other leaders to do it yet. Mm-hmm. So it's good to be reminded of that. As that reminder in Sabbath that Sabbath is a time where, one, God rests. He takes time to rest, but also that we're imitating God's pattern of his own existence. And I think there's this pattern in Sabbath that, yes, we cease and we stop doing things, but it's also a time to rejoice in the blessings, to celebrate the things God has given to us. And as Luther would put it in his explanation of the third commandment, to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, that part of it is to spend time on those days reflecting upon, being in God's word, receiving his gifts, where he feeds us not with the manna in the wilderness that they all eat and die, but as Jesus would say, the manna from heaven that feeds us to eternal life. This is interesting, but in verse 28, there's that interesting phrase, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and laws? So the only other place we've heard that was uttered by Moses to Pharaoh in chapter 10, verse 3. So it seems like maybe here, the people are in danger of becoming more like Egypt and the Egyptians than the holy people God has or is about to call them to be. So that's just interesting that phrase is there.
I have a note in my Bible that the you in how long will you refuse is plural.
Okay.
So it's all y'all, not just Moses.
Yeah, the community.
Yeah.
Will you refuse to do it?
Continuing in verse 31. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white, like coriander seed, and tasted like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt." So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to be kept for the generations to come." As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna with the tablets of the covenant law so that they might be preserved. The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. An omer is 1/10 of an ephah.
So let's just comment on the end of this chapter real briefly. Obviously, this seems to show that someone's added some notes later.
Sure.
So other generations must not have used an omer as a unit of measure. So they're clarifying what an omer is. Mm-hmm. And obviously, this hints at some problems to come if they were having the manna 40 years in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. If that was uttered then, those people before they had been forsaken might be going, wait a minute, what? This journey shouldn't take 40 years. Mm-hmm. So it's hinting at some bad things to come and maybe gives an indication that they're not going to pass the test very well. They're not going to do very good at this. I think that it tastes like honey seems to mean that we should take this as a symbol of something. What's the place that honey is often associated with?
Well, the promised land.
A land flowing with milk and honey, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of foreshadows this land they're heading to. It's a blessing, a provision now while they're going to be wandering in the wilderness for 40 years of where God is going to take them by his hand. And it's interesting. I love this. I took this from a commentary. William Popp, in his commentary, made this interesting observation that Israel passed through a 40-year period of childhood in the desert, like we've talked about, as Hosea describes it, where God gave them candy every day. Maybe that's why they grumbled. They were spoiled brats. I don't know they were spoiled brats, but that's just an interesting... I had never thought about that until I read it and went, huh.
Yeah, wafers made with honey.
Yeah, and especially back then, when, it's not like our culture where everything is loaded with sugar. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a reason why, in the Chronicles of Narnia, What's the treat that
Turkish delight.
Turkish delight. That anytime you give that to kids today, they're like, "This is disgusting.
That's gross.
Why would he give everything up for this?" But when you don't have everything filled with sweets, things that are mildly sweet taste like exceptional.
Sure.
I think it's why a lot of the times we don't like those old, like, European traditional desserts, right? Because they're more bitter than we're used to. But to them, they had enough sweetness So anyway, it's just interesting. So the mention of the 40 years, again, anticipates God's judgment on this generation that will come in Numbers 14. And it's worthy of note that the account in Numbers 14 follows a second incident with manna and quail that happens in Numbers 11, kind of paralleling this. And it also seems to indicate that this section was obviously added later, like I was saying, because they need to explain what some of those terms mean. Again, coming back to this idea of testing. If testing is more fully understood as training, like trying to train the people, right? How does the Lord's giving of the manna help prepare Israel for the law that's about to come in a couple of chapters? Well, I think it should instill trust that the Lord will provide and is trustworthy, that he'll guide them to the new land, that he loves them and cares for them and wants what's best for them. And with the daily provision and the special provision of the Sabbath day, there's this reminder to trust and look to the Lord for all that you need. So this ultimately ought to give us freedom from our anxious toil. And they'll forget again later in Exodus 32. They become anxious because they're anxious about the food, right? Are they going to have enough for tomorrow? And do you remember what story comes in Exodus 32?
The golden calf.
Yeah. And why do they end up making the golden calf? What are they anxious about?
Bored while Moses goes up the mountain.
Maybe bored. I would say anxious. We don't know what's happened to this guy Moses. He's been up there for 40 days. Aaron, make us some gods. And so when Moses is up on the mountain, they turn to idolatry and forget that Yahweh has provided for them. Forget Moses, who has led them. Who, it said, remember at the end of chapter 15, that they trusted in Yahweh and in his servant Moses. So, again, this Sabbath is something that even God participates in. It's something that we're supposed to be reminded that God is still going to uphold us, provide for us, care for us, that we don't need to be anxious in the midst of this life. And it seems that this command is to trust that you won't be forgotten, that God is going to remember you and provide for you. And so just listen to his word, follow the pattern of Yahweh that he's established by his own admission of his own rhythm of life, lack of a better word, and his own heart and character. In other words, we're to learn to walk in his ways. And if you read the Psalms, that's often the call. Walk in the ways of the Lord. Psalm 1 in particular is framing all the Psalms as the one who's wise walks in the path of the Lord.
I think that makes the fact that they put the omer of manna, they store it in a jar along with the tablets of the covenant law. I think that makes it even more beautiful because it's like both of these things are walking in the way of the Lord. Like upholding his commands, like living as he said you ought, but also living in the shadow of his wings and his protection and care.
Yeah. And, I mean, if you want to be extra Lutheran about it, they're put into the ark. Law and gospel, right? Free promise, free provision, free mercy, free care to know God's character. And the call to continue to walk in his ways and heed what he would have us do. It's beautiful. I think that's a good place to wrap up for this week.